I never expected the sound of crystal breaking to be the moment my life split open, but that's exactly what happened the night my husband called me useless in front of his entire family. My name is Elena Hart, and when all of this began, I was 34 and still naive enough to believe loyalty could mend a marriage. I grew up in Maple Crest, Ohio, in a house where my mother taught me two things: never let a garden die on your watch, and never let a man convince you your worth comes from him. I forgot the second lesson for a while. I remembered it the night the champagne flute shattered. It was early autumn, the kind where the trees burn red around the edges, but the evenings still hold the warmth of summer. My husband Jason had dragged me to his parents' anniversary dinner at their lakeside home, a house so large it felt like it inhaled you as soon as you walked in. His mother liked to say it was spacious for hosting, but really it was built for control. Everything about that place felt curated, rehearsed, and staged for admiration. I was standing near the long dining table arranging the bouquet. I brought sunset roses, my grandmother's favorite, when Jason's voice cut through the room like a snapped wire. If you actually contributed something meaningful to this family, maybe you wouldn't embarrass yourself every time we have people over. The room went silent. Even the fireplace seemed to pause its crackling. The champagne flute slipped from my hand and shattered across the marble floor. I stood still, heat crawling up my neck, the flush of humiliation, something I felt down to my bones. His family people who had known me for 8 years looked away. That was their specialty, selective blindness. Only one person didn't look away. Aiden, Jason's childhood friend and one of the few decent men I'd met through him, stepped forward. Jason, that was out of line. She didn't do anything wrong. Jason shot him a glare that held years of entitlement. This is family business. Stay out of it. Aiden didn't move. If this is how you speak to your wife in public, I don't want to imagine how you treat her in private. My breath caught. No one had ever said it out loud before. Not the implication, not the suspicion, not the truth. I buried under routines and excuses. I held the edge of the table to keep myself steady. The roses trembled. Jason's jaw tightened. Elena knows her role. She's fine. I felt something shift inside me, quiet at first, like the crack that happens deep in ice before it splits. I had spent years shrinking so he could expand. Years smoothing over his temper, apologizing for his carelessness, defending him to my own mother, who never quite trusted him. And suddenly all the shrinking felt humiliating. I stepped back, voice low but steady. I'm going home. Jason scoffed. No, you're staying. We will talk about this later. No, I said a word that felt heavier than the air around me. We won't. I walked out without taking my coat. Behind me, I heard Aiden say, "Do you want me to drive you?" And Jason snapping something angry and possessive, but I didn't turn around. Open loop. Because when I stepped outside into the cold evening air, still smelling faintly of lake water and leaves, I already knew something was wrong. Something bigger than humiliation, bigger than a dying marriage, something that would unravel the very foundation of my life. And I had no idea yet that revenge, real revenge, was already taking root. I drove home with shaking hands, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers went numb. My chest felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out everything inside me and left me echoing. The house was dark when I arrived, not surprising. Jason stayed late at work most nights, though work had begun to smell like lies months ago. I changed into sweats, curled up on the couch, and replayed the dinner over in my mind. The tone of his voice, the way his parents pretended not to hear, the way Aiden had stepped toward me, not away. Something inside me whispered, "Look deeper. Something's not right." I ignored it at first. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Aiden. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. If you ever need a place to breathe, I'm here." I didn't reply. I didn't trust myself to. An hour later, Jason came home. His footsteps were loud, angry loud, the way they always were when he needed someone to blame. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't sit beside me to apologize. He stood over me and said, "You made me look like a lunatic in front of my family." I stared at him. "You did that yourself." His eyes flashed, but instead of fighting, he stormed upstairs. Minutes later, I heard the shower. Then the closet door opening. Then drawers. Something about the rhythm of those movements made my stomach twist. When he finally came downstairs, he was dressed in fresh clothes, hair damp, keys in hand. "I have work to finish." "It's 10:30, I said quietly. He shrugged and walked out. The door closed, and I broke. Not because he left, but because the lie in his voice was too polished, too practiced. I walked upstairs into the closet. His cologne lingered sharp and expensive. I stared at the empty space where his duffel bag usually sat. He had taken it, open loop, and that's when I remembered something that would change everything: the letter from my aunt 3 weeks earlier. A letter about my inheritance. A letter Jason didn't know I had received, or at least I thought he didn't. The letter had arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. My Aunt Lorraine, my mother's older sister, had passed away the previous winter. We weren't close, but she'd left something for me. Something she wanted me to have privately. A separate inheritance, the lawyer had said. Not marital property, unless you choose to combine it. I never told Jason. Not because I wanted to hide it, but because keeping one small piece of my life untouched by his control felt like oxygen. Now, with the closet empty and Jason gone into the night with a duffel bag, I walked to my desk drawer and pulled out the envelope. Inside was the original notice and a statement from the lawyer that an initial deposit had already been placed in a private account under my name alone. I logged in and felt my heart drop. The balance wasn't what it should be, not even close. You know that moment when you look at something familiar and suddenly it becomes foreign? That's what it felt like staring at the numbers on the screen. I blinked once, twice, leaned in. A chunk of the inheritance, nearly a third, was gone. Transfer, transfer, withdrawal, transfer. All marked over the past 2 months. My name was digitally signed, except I hadn't signed any of it. My pulse hammered in my throat. I clicked the details, recipient name blurred, bank masked for privacy. But one note caught my eye. Authorization added by secondary account holder. Secondary account holder. I didn't have one, unless someone had made themselves one. Open loop twist. And suddenly Jason's late nights weren't just infidelity fears. They were something colder, something calculated. There was only one person who knew enough about my personal information to attempt something like that. My husband. But the signature didn't match his style. Too careful, too neat. Then another name surfaced in the metadata. A name I hadn't heard in years. Madeline Reeves. Jason's ex. The ex he swore he barely spoke to anymore. The ex who happened to work at a financial firm. The ex who once told mutual friends she should have married him when she had the chance. My breath left me in one long, cold exhale. When I called Jason the next morning, his voice was flat with practiced concern. "I can explain," he said. "There must be a mistake." Hearing that line made my stomach twist. Explain. A word that means telling the truth if you are honest and constructing an excuse if you are not. I checked the account, I said. Someone moved money out, a lot. There was a pause, then the kind of inhale people use when they are choosing which lie to tell. "I'll look into it," he said finally. "Maybe a bank error." "Don't worry." I closed the call and opened my laptop. Anxiety is a particular kind of clarity. It makes your hands do things you might otherwise stall over. I pulled every statement I could find, every email, every letter. I printed what I could, stapled pages together, made a timeline with the simple pencil my aunt always used, and started to map it out. The transfers had a rhythm, small withdrawals that escalated into larger ones near the end of the pattern. Dates where someone had logged in at unusual hours. A secondary authorizer added in the middle of a month I remember as rainy and dull when Jason said he was visiting a client out of town. I called the bank. The person on the other end was helpful and professional in a way that makes the word helpful feel like a promise. They told me there was a way to request an investigation to freeze accounts to file for fraud. They asked if I had the account number and whether the account was in my name alone. "Yes," I said, "it is in my name alone." And yet the representative said a secondary authorizer was added. The room felt colder somehow. My pencil scratched along the timeline, connecting dots that shouldn't have been connected. Next, I called Aiden. I didn't want to be the first to say anything at the dinner, he said. But that was cruel. "What can I do?" "Come over," I told him. "Bring coffee." Aiden arrived with a thermos and steady eyes. He is one of those people whose quiet presence makes you breathe better without thinking about it. We laid out the papers on the kitchen island like conspirators. "I don't want to accuse your husband," he said carefully, "but the signature on this authorization. Have you seen anything like it?" I shook my head. It was neat cold, the imposition of someone who knows how to make forms look official. "It might be Madeline Reeves," I said. "I found her name in the metadata." Jason said they were friends. Aiden frowned. "Madeline works in wealth management. She knows paperwork. If she had access to your information..." "It's not just access," I interrupted, "it's intent." That afternoon, I went to Jason's office. I told myself I was going for information for clarity, The receptionist pretended not to notice the way my hands trembled when I asked for him. They told me he had stepped out for a client meeting and would be back shortly. Then I waited. I sat in reception watching the world move in small, reliable ways that mocked the disarray in my chest. People typed, phones rang, someone brought in a delivery of fresh pastries. The ordinary order of things felt offensive. When Jason walked in, he looked surprised to see me. Elena. He sounded again like he had been coached to be normal. What are you doing here? I want to know why my account shows transfers and a secondary authorizer, I said. Do you know anything about that? He set his briefcase down like someone settling a bomb. No, he said. I haven't touched your accounts. Maybe you misread something. There was a small, sick part of me that wanted to beg him to tell the truth. Instead, I asked for the one thing that is hardest for someone like him to refuse: paperwork. Can I see your correspondence with Madeline? Anything that mentions my name. His jaw clenched. No, he said, that's private. Private, I thought. Private and useful when it allowed someone to hide. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the pendant my aunt left me in my palm. It felt warmer than any argument. I made a decision I had practiced in my head for nights, painful, precise. I called a lawyer. Diane was everything the movies rarely show about lawyers: steady, unglamorous, and unflinching. She listened to the facts and did not blink. Freeze the account, she said. Get a forensic accountant. Do not confront anyone until we have a better picture. Entitlement turns dangerous when threatened. That phrase, entitlement turns dangerous, stayed with me. I imagined a man like Jason used to smooth transactions of power confronted by a woman who would no longer be quiet. It felt like angle I had never thought to take, make the small, practical moves that law knows how to enforce. We filed the paperwork to freeze the account. The bank complied politely with the kind of mechanical sympathy that understands its role in a firewall. The forensic accountant Diane suggested called me the next morning. Jonathan had the careful tone of someone who liked maps and lists. He asked to see everything. When he arrived, he spread files on the table with a calm that made my heart stop leaping in my chest for a moment. He spoke in a way that made the numbers feel like material, rather than betrayal. These transfers, he said, tapping a line, they are coordinated. There are intermediary accounts. Someone added a signer using falsified authorization. The sentence landed like a hammer. Can you trace them, I asked? Yes, he said, but be ready. This will take time. As Jonathan spoke, a name I did not expect appeared on his screen, Madeline Reeves, but beneath it, another name glinted like an undertow. A name I had not seen in any of my immediate searches. A name that would promise to complicate this whole thing. When Jonathan revealed the secondary name, I felt both curiosity and a cold dread. He did not show it like a reveal on a stage. He showed it like a tool. Peter Hargrove, he said. He's tied to small real estate deals. He's a facilitator. He sets up intermediary accounts and collects small fees. It's how he makes money. I remember laughing at first, a brittle sound. How would he be involved with my money? People like Peter are handy, Jonathan said. If someone wants to channel money without direct association, they use people familiar with paperwork. It's plausible deniability. The phrase made my blood run slow. The diagram he drew in black ink looked like a crooked tree, one main trunk that split into branches, then roots that twisted into pockets. The pattern hinted at a network cozy, small practiced. Not the work of a solo opportunist, but of a group who understood how to use social proximity to their advantage. You need to be careful, Diane said. This isn't social gossip anymore. It's potential criminal. Do not confront anyone alone. We work with the DA if necessary. It was strangely comforting to have someone mark the boundaries. The internet has taught us to shout first and think later. Law says gather map and then act. There is dignity in process. I started to notice things in retrospect. The small dinners at Jason's parents' house, where Madeline showed up by chance, the times Jason left his phone in the bathroom and emerged tinted with perfume, the way Peter would always be introduced as helpful with paperwork. These were not coincidences. They were a choreography of access. I began to keep a diary, not the confessional kind, but a factual ledger. Dates, times, observations. It felt unromantic and necessary. I took screenshots, I printed emails, I saved receipts that looked unremarkable until they were not. Word spread differently than I expected. When Diane suggested we not tell everyone, I bristled. But she was right. The fewer flamboyant declarations we made, the less chance of ruined evidence. So I kept my circles tight. Diane, Jonathan, Aiden, and a handful of friends who understood the gravity without turning it into spectacle. Aiden became a lifeline in ways that surprised me. He came over in the evenings to sit with me while I worked through the statements. Sometimes he vanished into the annex where my grandfather had kept a workshop and came back with a cup of tea and a quiet comment. The intimacy of his presence was not romantic in the loud way of novels. It was a steadying hand, a companion in the trenchwork of recovery. One evening, 3 weeks into the freeze and the first investigations, I received a letter from the DA's office. They wanted to meet. The paper was formal, the kind of bureaucracy that smells faintly of copier, toner, and purpose. Someone had noticed commonalities in accounts across the region. My case, or rather the pattern in my case, had joined a longer list. At the DA's office, I sat across from a woman named Marissa, who had the admonishing niceness of someone who sees bad things for a living and chooses to name them. She spoke plainly. "We think there's a network," she said. "Not necessarily large-scale organized crime, but a constellation of opportunists who prey on trust. They cultivate relationships, and then they channel funds through intermediaries. It's predatory." "Can you prove it?" I asked. She looked at me like someone who had delivered bad but necessary news 100 times. "We can if victims come forward. The more people who provide statements, the clearer the pattern. We will subpoena bank records. We will issue subpoenas to intermediaries." I felt the exhale of being heard. There is a particular solitude to being the one who finally names the thing you fear. Saying it aloud, network, made the betrayal less personal and more systemic. It also meant other women could be in the same map. Mini hook. The DA asked if I was willing to be a named complainant in a consolidated action. It was the sort of question that asked you to make your private wound public for the sake of others. I hesitated because speaking meant more hearings, more scrutiny. Then I thought of my aunt's necklace and how she had been careful with her affairs all her life. I thought of the teacher in Memphis who later wrote me a note. I said yes. The investigation widened like a tide. Subpoenas issued. Records returned with names that threaded across towns. Provident little details surfaced, small transfers timed to dates when victims were vulnerable, messages that used compliments to lower guards, and the quiet manipulations that turn acquaintance into exploitation. The press, when it arrived, did so politely at first. An assignment here, a phone call there. I kept my public comments tight and simple: truth, protection, prevention. But privately, the process felt like being in a slow storm. You accumulate fragments, you wait for them to fit. And then a name kept appearing: Erin Mitchell. She had been in messages and screenshots and a few deposit records. She seemed to be the linchpin, charismatic, careful, the kind of person whose confidence becomes the tool of deception. When the DA's office served a warrant on a rental unit connected to Erin, I felt the strange mix of relief and dread that accompanies seeing your suspicion confirmed. The police found documents, ledgers, phone records, notes that looked at first like a small business plan, and then, upon closer inspection, read like a predatory manual. The day Erin was arrested, I sat on my grandmother's porch and watched a squirrel inspect last year's bird feeder. I felt an odd, quiet victory. It did not feel like triumph, more like recognition that a wrong had been noticed. But beneath that, there remained the question of others. Erin was one node. The network could be larger. Peter's name still hovered in the periphery. Once Erin was in custody, the DA moved with the deliberate rhythm of institutions, subpoenas, witness lists, plea negotiations. There was a sense of forward motion, but also the recognition that legal processes take time. I found myself telling the story again and again, first to Diane, then to Jonathan, then to Marissa, and later in depositions that tried to pin down exact amounts and dates. Repeating a trauma in service of truth is strange. It is both analgesic and invasive. Each retelling made the betrayal slightly clearer and slightly less privatized. At home, life continued in its small, defiant ordinariness. I went to work, designed gardens, measured sunlight angles, recommended plants that would thrive in shade. There is an odd healing in creating things that will outlast you. Planting a shrub that will live for decades feels like investing in a future you can trust. But the cost of speaking was not only procedural, it has social tolls. Some friends drifted away unsure how to act around the publicness of a legal case. Jason's family shrank into defensiveness. Evelyn sent carefully worded notes that read like apologies without admission. There were whispers at the club where I had once been a member of a bridal committee. People make narratives to keep themselves comfortable, and sometimes those narratives do not include you. Then a new complication arrived. An anonymous email appeared in my inbox one morning. It contained a single attached document, an internal memo from a small title company linking Peter Hargrove to a slate of informal service agreements. The document suggested he had been paid for consulting on informal account setups. It was the kind of paper trail that, once seen, felt like a map to the heart of the operation. I forwarded it to Diane. She called the DA. Later that week, the DA subpoenaed Peter's records. When they interviewed him, he claimed plausible deniability. He'd provided business advice for property deals and sometimes helped acquaintances set up accounts. He insisted he did not know these accounts would be used to siphon funds. There is a certain legal magic in the phrase plausible deniability. It smells like a lawyer's brief and works best when facts are messy or credibility can be attacked. But Jonathan's forensic work had stacked facts in a way that made deniability feel thin. Transactions aligned. Timing matched victim accounts. Emails showed introductions. Peter's defense pivoted predictably, attack the witnesses, suggest personal motives, emphasize technicalities. The legal world loves a distraction. In the days leading up to the preliminary hearing, I felt my life narrows into preparation. I practiced testimony the way an athlete practices a routine over and over until the words lost their sting and became tools. Diane coached tone and pauses. Jonathan reviewed timelines. Aiden sat quietly and listened to my reports like a man who had decided to be present without spectacle. The morning of the hearing, I woke before dawn. I sat on the bench by my grandmother's garden and watched birds hunt for the first worms of spring. There is a sacredness to sunrise that feels like the world's way of saying there is always a beginning after the dark. At court, the gallery was fuller than I expected. Reporters, victims from other towns, and a few faces I recognized from neighborhood PTA meetings filed in quietly. The DA presented a mosaic: Aaron's communications, Peter's intermediary accounts, the chain of transfers. The defense's objections were surgical. The judge ruled on procedural questions with the exhausted impartiality of someone who has seen many such human storms. When the DA called me to the stand, I felt the old tremor but steadied myself. I spoke the truth plainly. I described patterns. I showed the documents that matched dates and amounts. I explained how relationships had been used as instruments, how flattery and proximity had been used as levers to access trust. The defense did what defenses do, Price suggest, an attempt to paint me as emotional and thereby unreliable. But Jonathan's data sat like a quiet witness of its own, each transaction a small, undeniable fact. The judge allowed key testimonies to proceed. The preliminary hearing ended with a decision to move forward on several counts. It was not a conviction. It was not even necessarily a trial. But it was progress and institutional acknowledgement that these behaviors warranted scrutiny and possible consequences. Outside the courthouse, Mary from Jackson, one of the women who had been a victim, took my hand. Her fingers were warm and steady. "We did it," she said simply. "We made them account for it." That night, I went home and sat on the porch looking at the garden I designed the previous summer. The moonlight fell on the rose bushes in a way that made shadows look like lace. The legal motion was a strange companion for such ordinary, fragile beauty. But the juxtaposition felt right. You fix rows, enforce boundaries, prune the dead both in soil and in life. The package shouldn't have frightened me as much as it did. After everything I had already been through, the fraud, the legal battle, the courtroom glare of strangers weighing my life, I thought nothing could shake me the way betrayal had. But when I lifted the lid of that plain cardboard box and saw the photograph inside, something cold and primal unfurled inside my chest. It was a picture of my house, not from the street, not from a drone, but from somewhere close, frighteningly close, angled through the lattice of the side fence exactly where the hydrangeas grew. I flipped it over. 3 handwritten words weighted like a threat whispered against the back of my neck. We are watching. No signature, no timestamp, just the echo of something that felt too deliberate to be dismissed. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone was trying to intimidate me generically because my name had appeared in the news. Victims who speak publicly often get warned about crank letters, attention seekers, anonymous cowards who enjoy the high of fear they don't have to witness. I wanted to believe that. But 3 details gnawed at me: the angle, the distance, the knowledge of where I lived. This wasn't a stranger with a newspaper clipping. This was someone who had stood on my property. My breath grew thin, shallow. The edges of my vision pulsed. I called Diane first. She didn't gasp. She didn't dramatize. She didn't even raise her voice. "Bring it to my office," she said. "Do not walk outside alone. Do not throw anything away. And Elena, take this seriously." Her calm made it worse somehow. Calm means precedent. Calm means she's seen this before. I set the photo on the kitchen table, but couldn't stop glancing at it. The image seemed to hum with malice. The hydrangea leaves blurred slightly, as if the photographer had taken it quickly, afraid of being seen, or confident he wouldn't be. My phone buzzed. "Aiden, do you need anything I can swing by?" I hesitated before replying. He had already done so much, shown up at hearings, sat with me during late-night document sorting, walked beside me when everything in my life felt like shifting earth. I didn't want him pulled into more. But fear is persuasive. "Yes," I typed. "Please." 10 minutes later, he pulled into the driveway, his headlights soft against the evening light. I stepped out before he reached the porch. My voice betrayed me. It trembled as I tried to explain. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked, "Where exactly was this angle taken from?" We walked to the side of the house, stood among the hydrangeas. The evening breeze carried the smell of cut grass and distant rain. Aiden crouched, examining the fence. "Someone stood right here," he murmured. "And they weren't hiding. They wanted you to know someone could get this close." Why, I asked, voice barely audible. Aiden looked up at me with a kind of quiet gravity. Because when people are cornered, when networks fall apart, they get unpredictable. His words hit harder than the photograph. When Diane saw the photograph the next morning, she didn't try to comfort me. She went straight to analysis. "This is intimidation," she said. "Low level but intentional." The good news is that intimidation means pressure, they're worried. "Worried enough to come to my home?" I asked. Her eyes softened. People who benefit from silence don't like when stories expand. She passed the photograph to the DA's investigator, who reviewed it carefully. He asked questions about recent packages, unknown vehicles, anyone lingering around the neighborhood. I told him about the silver sedan I'd seen twice last week, a detail I had dismissed as coincidence then, but now felt like a shard of something larger. He made notes. "We're adding patrols near your house, and you're not to be outside alone at night. Understood?" I nodded, though something in me resisted the idea of shrinking again after working so hard to reclaim myself. As I left the DA's office, Jonathan caught up with me in the hallway. He looked troubled, more troubled than a numbers man usually allows himself to appear. "There's something I need to show you," he said, lowering his voice. We stepped into an empty conference room. He pulled out a file and opened it to a page marked with 3 sticky notes. "These transactions," he said, tapping with his pen, "are from an account connected to the same network we identified. But the source is different." "Different how?" He turned the page. The name printed on the originating account made my stomach clench. Jason Hart. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room grew smaller. The edges of my vision blurred, and all I could hear was the echo of his voice saying I embarrassed him. "You're sure?" I whispered. "Yes. And before you panic, listen carefully." Jonathan leaned in. "The data suggests he wasn't the architect. He didn't create the accounts. He wasn't the central operator." "Then what was he?" Jonathan hesitated. "A doorway. A doorway." The word felt like a betrayal, deeper than infidelity, deeper than the humiliation on the night of the anniversary dinner. A doorway means access. A doorway means vulnerability. A doorway means he allowed someone else into the house that held my life. "Do you think he knew?" I asked. Jonathan pursed his lips. "My professional opinion, yes. My legal opinion, harder to prove." I felt myself sway, and he steadied me with a small gesture of his hand, not intimate, just human. "Elena, there's more," he added softly. We've identified a recurring contact number connected to both Aaron and Peter. Whose number? He slid the page toward me. The name printed above the number made the cold in my chest spread to my fingertips. Douglas Reeves, Madeline's older brother. The brother Jason always said was barely around. The brother known to run consulting gigs no one quite understood. The brother who had once years ago joked at a Christmas party that Elena's too trusting for her own good. It wasn't a joke. It never had been. 2 nights later, I saw the silver sedan again. It idled at the end of my street, engine running, headlights off. Just a faint glow from the dashboard. My heart spiked. I stood at my upstairs window, barely moving, watching as the shape of a man leaned forward behind the steering wheel. Not Jason, not Peter, not anyone I immediately recognized. The car remained there for nearly 10 minutes. I texted Aiden, he's back. He replied immediately, stay inside, I'm coming. While I waited, I stepped away from the window but couldn't sit still. Every part of me hummed with adrenaline, with fear, with the memory of the photograph that felt like someone breathing against the back of my neck. Minutes later, Aiden's truck pulled in. He got out calmly, too calmly, and walked toward the street. The sedan's brake lights flickered. For a moment, I thought it would flee. It didn't. Instead, the window rolled down halfway. Aiden's shoulders tensed. I pressed my face against the glass to see. The man inside leaned just far enough for the street lamp to catch the edge of his profile. Broad jaw, dark hair, unfamiliar, but the confidence in his posture was unmistakable. They exchanged a few words I couldn't hear. Then, slowly, deliberately, the driver lifted his hand and tapped 2 fingers against the roof of the car, as if tipping an invisible hat before driving away without haste. Aiden came inside, jaw tight, breath sharp. What did he say? I demanded. Aiden didn't answer right away. He sat down at the kitchen table, rubbed his eyes, and exhaled hard. He said, Aiden murmured, voice low, that you should stop digging. My breath caught. Who was he? Aiden shook his head. He didn't give a name. But Elena, he wasn't bluffing. Men like that don't idle on quiet streets unless they believe they're safe doing it. Was he threatening me? He was warning you. A warning. Warnings always come before something worse. I felt the weight of every decision I had made, going to the DA, freezing the account, testifying, naming names. I felt the cost of stepping out of silence and into truth. I felt how fragile safety is when someone decides you are in their way. Aiden reached across the table and placed his hand over mine, gentle, firm grounding. We're not backing down, he said. Not now. I nodded even as fear pressed against my ribs. Mini hooked toward next chapter. But later that night, while lying awake, I realized something chilling. The man in the sedan hadn't come